Our first speaker, come on up, is Ellen Peel, and she's a professor at San Francisco State, and she will be talking on imagining the constructed body from status to cyborgs. I'll let her say more.
Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through the mic?
I'm going to go flat. I'm going to go like this when you have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm very happy to be here. I'm really interested in interdisciplinary topics, and what I'm talking about tonight is part of a larger project. I'm working on a book project. So, okay, yeah. Thank you. I just retired this summer, but I still feel part of my departments, Comparative and World Literature and English at San Francisco State. This is an image from the San Francisco Ballet's version of Frankenstein. They, with the National Ballet in England, created this original ballet. So actually I'll stay back with the image for a little while. Imagine these vastly different bodies. Statues that spring to life, robots, cyborgs, test tube babies, clones, Frankenstein's creature, vampire thralls, people with organ transplants. Some have come into existence only recently, and others still exist only in science fiction or fantasy, at least for now. Despite their differences, all these and many more can be seen as what I call constructed bodies, and all have been represented in vivid, sometimes disturbing narratives. Think of the man who adores a feminine automaton in E.T.A. Hoffman's The Sandman, the man who turns anorexia into performance art in Franz Kafka's A Hunger Artist, and the various golems of legend who are sculpted from earth and brought to life by words. Such narratives matter in part because they raise compelling theoretical questions in the areas of race, disability, gender, queerness, object-oriented ontology, the post-human, the transhuman, among many others. In my longer project, I addressed such issues more directly. In this paper, I'll be claiming that many such seemingly disparate narratives have a good deal in common, so much so that they in fact form a genre. I'm linking phenomena whose commonalities are significant but have often been neglected. Frankengenre has been what Suzanne Keene calls a tacit generic tradition. The time has come to make it explicit and make known its importance. Although some theorists have written about some of these texts, I believe I'm the first to see the commonalities among various types, and thus to explore how reading one can help us read another. My thesis is threefold. One, narratives that give a significant role to a constructed body usually share enough traits to make them members of a genre. Two, of those traits, those that aesthetically matter the most, are the self-referential meta-traits. And three, the genre has flourished in the West for 2 centuries and is now in the process of forming an offshoot. Here's an overview of what I'll be talking about after setting the stage by defining constructed body, offering an example of both basic types, and giving a sense of what I mean by genre. I'll spend the most time on point 1, describing various traits that make up the genre. Then I'll describe its self-referential meta-traits and briefly explain how the genre and its offshoot are situated in literary and technological history. Other theorists have given some attention to the historical, ethical, and affective aspects, but the aesthetic aspects have been neglected. I hope to fill that gap. As I define it, constructing a body refers to physically building a human or humanoid body by artificial means, by means other than intercourse between a man and a woman. I also include mental construction, but that's beyond the scope of this paper tonight. Within the physical category, construction can mean either creating the body from scratch or modifying it, one's own body or another's. I've chosen two narratives, one of each kind, in which to ground today's talk, though I'll also refer briefly to additional examples. I focus on literature with some examples from visual media. The paradigmatic kind of constructed body is that which is built from scratch, and the paradigmatic example is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, first published 200 years ago, and then the next major edition was 1831. Hugely influential, the novel possesses most of the traits in the genre. Among narratives of bodies constructed by modification, I've chosen Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Birthmark, 1843, in which a scientist who considers his wife perfectly beautiful, except for her birthmark, succeeds in removing it, but at the cost of her life. For the concept of genre, I draw on Suzanne King, who says a genre means the name by which we recognize a group of texts dynamically linked through shared formal, stylistic, and thematic features. It's impossible to find the label Frankengenre on an Amazon menu. Nonetheless, I believe that authors and readers do already have a general sense about it, if only implicitly. Let's now look at specific traits that characterize narratives of the constructed body. I'll present them in four groups, though there's a considerable overlap: plot, knowledge, power, and ideology. First, plot. The paradigmatic case, bodies constructed from scratch, offers the fullest sequence of plot functions. It begins with the following steps in the following order. They seem kind of obvious, but we'll see why they matter. 1, the constructor develops the desire to make a body. 2, the constructor makes the body. 3, the constructor animates the body. Victor Frankenstein, for example, desires to construct a body for several reasons, including to make a species that will worship him as their creator. He makes the body, giving it beautiful features, but in step 3, when he animates the body, he suddenly finds it hideous. Irony is a pervasive characteristic of this genre, and the oft-found disjunction between steps 2 and 3 makes possible a particular sort of irony that I call irony of expectation. The character expects one thing to happen, but something else happens. In Frankengenre, often something negative. Also notice that in Ovid's account of Pygmalion, the one who makes the body, the sculptor Pygmalion, is different from the one who animates it, the goddess Venus. In One Tale of Body Modification, The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, not the Disney version, the mermaid is the one who desires the transformation, but the sea witch is the one who carries it out. Actually, that is something both versions have in common. In The Birthmark, the scientist both desires and carries out the transformation, but his desire for it also infects his wife, Georgiana. And sometimes a constructor modifies another character's body as a form of punishment without their consent. After step 3, constructed body plots diverge, but certain steps are common regardless of their order. For A, the constructed character evokes reactions from the constructor, other characters, and him or herself. For B, the constructed character gets a name. For C, the constructed character gets an education. For D, the constructed character seeks to reproduce himself or herself. So the most important of these is 4A, the constructed body evokes reactions. In Frankenstein, horror is the reaction of Victor and most other characters, except significantly a blind man. One reason Shelley's book is so compelling is that it includes the reactions of the creature himself, who reflects a good deal on his situation. In Hawthorne's tale, when the birthmark disappears, the scientist reacts with delight. His wife realizes she's dying, and yet she still pities her husband for losing her, whereas his Igor-like assistant chuckles, implying, "I told you so." Step 4B, naming, or lack thereof, has particular resonance in verbal narratives. One of Victor's most notable failings as a parent is his failure to name his creature. Other nouns, such as fiend, fill the vacuum. Sometimes a narrator tells us no name for the constructed character, so we may be unsure as to whether the constructed body has received one. Pygmalion's statue come to life, for example, was not called Galatea until the 18th century. In some narratives of body modification, the constructed character receives a new or modified name, as when Helva merges with a spaceship in Anne McCaffrey's The Ship Who Sank. A number of texts representing construction from scratch include step 4C, education. Characters made from scratch desperately need to learn. Narratives vary widely in how much education the character receives and in how the process occurs. Surprisingly, Frankenstein's self-taught creature receives a great deal of education on his own. Sometimes texts representing body modification also include education as a way for the constructed character to adapt to the modified body. For example, Helva's training before merging with a spaceship. Another step common in narratives representing construction from scratch is 4D, reproduction. Must the constructed character rely on the original constructor to make more, or can the character reproduce on his or her own? Shelley's novel suggests both methods. Like most other narratives, those in Frankengenre have some sort of closure. Step 5, the constructor, the constructed character, or both reach closure. Often this step destroys one or both. Death takes on added resonance in this genre with its focus on the creation and modification of life. In some narratives, step 5 is less definitive. The Little Mermaid throws herself into the sea, believing that she will dissolve into foam, but she finds herself reborn as one of the daughters of the air. In Frankenstein, the creature claims he will kill himself, but we don't actually witness that. A cautionary moral may be articulated at the end of the narrative. Frankenstein's creature addresses Victor's corpse, and after Georgiana's death, her husband, the scientist, is mocked by his assistant's earthy chuckle, as well as by the narrator's commentary. The next major point is knowledge. In all narratives, knowledge is crucial for the author, narrator, characters, and readers. But in Frankengenre, it's especially important. To begin with, the would-be constructor needs knowledge to carry out the construction, and constructed characters often yearn to know how to produce or reproduce others like themselves. The most noteworthy area in which knowledge operates within the genre the areas are the three: dramatic irony, the gaze, and narrative situation. Within Frankengenre, dramatic irony arises most often around the issue of whether a character is constructed or not. In Frankenstein, it's all too obvious that the creature is constructed. But in Karl Čapek's RUR, which created the word robot, one woman first mistakes a robot for a human and then mistakes several humans for robots. In The Little Mermaid, the prince is as ignorant of the mermaid's body modification as of her love for him. In Frankengenre, dramatic irony points to two profound issues. First, it suggests the knotty epistemological and ethical problems of passing. Among constructed body texts, passing can range from the unintentional, as in the RUR example just given, to the scheming, as in some replicants in the film Blade Runner. Yet other replicants in Blade Runner face a different fate. Sometimes even constructed characters themselves are unaware of their own origins and don't at first realize they're passing. Secondly, in Frankengenre, dramatic irony often raises the question, what defines human? It's unsettling if we find we can't easily prove either construction or its absence. How indeed can one tell? By the ability to feel physical pain, the experience of emotions, humane behavior, the presence of a soul? The next major realm in which knowledge operates is the gaze, which in Frankengenre occupies a special place. To start with, it provides a way to attempt to acquire knowledge. One character gazes at another and wonders, or fails to wonder, is this stitched together thing a human? Does this birthmark mar my wife's perfect beauty? Furthermore, possession of a gaze can signify that a character has subjectivity, a soul, or independence. What disturbs Frankenstein the most at the animation moment is that the creature looks back at him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. And of course, in a genre about constructing bodies, some narratives, such as Blade Runner and The Sandman, dwell disturbingly on constructing literal eyes. Finally, in a genre based on what can be a spectacular event, the construction process, and its result, the constructed body, of course many narratives vividly appeal to the gaze of the film viewer or to the mind's eye of the reader. Another realm of knowledge is narrative situation, informally called point of view. Gérard Genette famously characterizes it as who sees and who speaks. Who sees, focalization, can be read as who acquires knowledge. Our analysis of dramatic irony has just explained how crucial knowledge is. Equally crucial is the power to be the one who speaks. Narration, the one with the power to narrate. If a text delegates focalization or narration to a constructed character, that character gains subjectivity, personhood. Shelley enriches her novel by making it focalized and narrated by the constructor, the constructed, and another character. To move to power, power has two strands, the power to do something and the power over someone or something. Frankengenre relies heavily on both. The constructor must first have the power to construct the body, and the resulting body then has some degree of power to act. In Frankenstein, Victor and the creature both have extraordinary abilities to do things. Similarly, Hawthorne's scientist gains the ability to remove his wife's birthmark, but only the power given to her by that fatal modification is the power to please her husband perfectly. The more significant form taken by power in this genre is power over. Through step 2, the constructor is the subject, and the constructed body is the object. But once animated, is the body an object or a subject, a thing or a person? A number of texts, such as Stanislaw Lem's The Mask, play with pronouns as the constructed character an it, or else a she or he. Rebellion by constructed characters has become almost a commonplace in the genre. The subject also functions as an object in the sense that constructors sometimes have power over themselves, or sometimes lack it. Some modify their bodies accidentally. A further twist involves the role of divinities in nature. Is a constructor honoring them by imitation or rebelling against them for power over constructed bodies? Frankenstein and the birthmark make this rebellion a central theme. I'll move more quickly through the next 2 points. Ideology, which I use neutrally to mean value and belief. Many critics have discussed the issue of ethics in these texts. I'll move on now to self-referentiality, by which I mean art about art. Frankengenre is inherently self-referential. The resemblance between constructed bodies and texts, which are by definition constructed, makes it possible for a text about a constructed body to comment on texts. Through the parallel between ordinary bodies and constructed bodies, and through the parallel between constructed bodies and texts, all constructed body texts are self-referential, and some of them make the connection explicit. Shelley calls her novel My Hideous Progeny. Sometimes the very method of construction is self-referential, as when it involves words. Many a golem is animated by sacred words. Certain meta-traits comprise the heart of the genre's self-referentiality: interpretation, metaphor, and translation. For today, I'll focus on the first of these. Interpretation is integral to literature. In an analogous way, characters interpret constructed bodies. Furthermore, authors interpret the world around them in order to write about it. Similarly, constructors interpret typical human bodies before building a constructed version. To move on to situate the genre historically, very briefly, although examples have existed for millennia, Ovid's Pygmalion, the seeming stature in Shakespeare's Winter's Tale, the genre really started in the West around 1800 with the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. It's flourished for 2 centuries, and around 2000 it produced an offshoot, as exemplified in Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, 2005, which has 2 kinds of construction. Human clones are created to provide organs to be harvested for other humans. In the offshoot genre, which I call Frankenstein 2.0, there are still constructed bodies, but the plot is not about their constructedness, and they're more taken for granted. There's more than one constructed body, more than one kind, the technology's been around for a while, steps 1 through 3 are omitted, and sometimes even steps 4 and 5. Examples include the Maximum Ride series and John Scalzi's Android Stream. To conclude, narratives of the constructed body form a distinct genre with a distinct aesthetic. The myriad examples share patterns of plot, knowledge, power, and ideology, which in turn combine to create the genre's characteristic self-referentiality. Technological acceleration makes these themes urgent. How does creation relate to power and consent? When do creations escape their creators? Might the opposition between self and other, subject and object, or human and machine be deconstructed? And how is creating the body of a text like creating a human body? I hope, in short, that next time you search for a book or a movie on Amazon, you'll be able to look under Frankenstein. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Oh, above the boards of student eating pizza in the other room. So, questions? Yeah.
Would Pinocchio fall under this?
Yes, yes. And if you're only familiar with the Disney, I don't want Disney does really interesting interpretations, but the Italian translation is really scary. I would not read it to my kid. It's very violent and disturbing, but yes, the carpenter makes a wooden boy who then becomes animated, and then later is rewarded for finally becoming good by turning into a real human. So there are multiple stages in that. Did you want to say more about it?
Well, it seems like that tends to be like that is a morale play, right?
Yes.
Where the cricket is the voice of conscience, right? And it's
Yes.
all about his spiritual, psychological, emotional development into a real person. Yeah, right? Becomes rewarded with being a real person. But that doesn't seem to be a function of frankly genre, right? There's never a switch to become an actual person in the genres that you're describing.
It's rare, but it does happen. I guess one of the times when it seems to happen is the Winter's Tale, where it seems that a statue comes to life. Or I guess Pygmalion statue comes to life and becomes a real albeit nameless.
So does that seem to be a characteristic of the older versions of stories? Or it seems like the ones that you're citing now, there always seems to be a conflict or a... And when I think about the movies that I've thought about, where they have replicants or clones or Battlestar Galactica comes to mind, right?
Westworld.
Yes, Westworld. I, Robot is a great movie. They always end up living, a human-esque civilization of their own in parallel with humanity. It doesn't seem like there's a kind of joining or a becoming of humanity.
So those are two separate things. I think you're right. Rarely does the constructed body become human, but there are some cases. And often, if there are a bunch of constructed bodies there, there's another.
Is there another question?
Yes.
Tomorrow, oddly enough, at CIIS, a Stanford antiquity scholar is giving a talk on gods and robots. And
I'd love to hear that.
yeah, and so she claims that the robotic imagination was back in Greece and in Indian times, robotics was a Buddha. And I'm just wondering if there were retroactive.
I think there are some, like Hephaestus makes these bronze babies who come to life. I unfortunately don't know much about
itself, when you said if the book, the novel itself becomes a narrative itself?
Well, it refers to art in various ways, including actually itself, in the sense, first it refers to a genre, because the word author is used as to just refer to people who cause things to happen. But then in particular, in the 1831 introduction, Mary Shelley makes real parallels between how she thought of the story and how Victor created his creature, and then she refers to the book itself as my hideous progeny. So Victor made hideous big offspring. Does that?
Yeah, I mean, I can
On different levels.
I'll ask you later.
Okay, got it.